Before we get into the enigma that is Donald Trump, we first have to start with what came before Donald. Christ. No, not that Christ. That Christ. Fred Trump was born in 1905 and then died in 1999. Born in 1905, you might be wondering, was he a racist? And my answer to that question would be absolutely yes. Yes, he was. His father, Frederick, was a German immigrant and businessman. He left his son Fred $31,000, which would be $600,000 in 2024, after he passed away. He passed away of the Spanish flu in 1918, believe it or not. And on top of that inheritance money, Fred's mother, Elizabeth, was still the owner of several New York real estate properties that belonged to Frederick before he died. Fred Trump is quoted as saying, "When I was a kid, I used to play with blocks, erect door sets, and things like that." This, according to Fred, was his inspiration to start a real estate development company. Unlike the kids these days, he actually worked hard and put in the effort for his vision of a Trump real estate empire. Also, unlike the kids these days, he already had a real estate empire that his parents built and $600,000 in cash that his dad left behind, so yeah. What's your excuse, buddy? Just about the only difference Fred made to his mom's real estate company was changing the name from Elizabeth Trump & Son to just the Trump Organization. Oh, and he broke more laws. And screwed over more people. And gave the world this guy. After going into business with his mom, or rather, I should say, after accepting a loan from his mom, Fred truly started to shine. The next example is going to show you just how easy life really is when you have a head start. And millionaire parents. Fred was loaned $800 from his mother in 1923, equivalent to $14,000 in 2024, as well as a piece of land in Queens that was also provided by his mother. Fred had the idea to build a family home, which he did. Fred then finished the home and sold it for $7,000, equivalent to $120,000 in 2024. That is an 88% return on investment, all because Fred's mother gave him some allowance money. Just 5 years after building that first Queens home, Fred was 21 and had a growing real estate empire. But remember, this guy's last name is Trump, so he's not off the hook yet. Not after what he did in June of 1927. No, sir. But how bad could it be, right? We've all made mistakes. It's not like he attended and got arrested at a KKK rally. He attended and got arrested at a KKK rally. Fred's big break, though, would come in his mid-20s when he opened up his very own supermarket. Can you guess what Fred named it? I'll give you a hint. Think of what his future son Donald would have named the place. That's right. He named it Trump Market. Afraid of having his name attached to failure, however, Fred vowed to never name another business after himself after selling the market in less than a year. This ideology clearly did not rub off on Donald. By the end of his 20s, Fred was married to Mary Ann McLeod, a Scottish immigrant he had met at a dance party in the 1930s. The two were married and living together in Jamaica, Queens by the end of 1936. Fred Christ Trump continued to expand his company, and by 1940 he had over 400 employees working for him. How did he grow so rapidly, you might ask? Well, there was this thing called the Great Depression that was ravaging the country in the 1930s. And Fred Trump not only remained revenue neutral through this gruesome period, he profited through this gruesome period. U.S. President at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his administration were doing everything they could to ensure Americans were able to buy and own property, so they started the Federal Housing Authority to help Americans, working class Americans. But no, Trump saw money like a shark sees blood in the water. Taking advantage of the poor and starving was not a line too far for Fred, and so he borrowed extensively from the Federal Housing Authority to fund his real estate projects, pocketing and profiting millions of dollars in the process. Fred Trump's entire fortune, which would then become Donald's fortune, was obtained almost entirely through the exploitation of federal government housing subsidies. Prior to tapping into the Federal Housing Authority's mortgage insurance program, Fred only had the means to build one single-family home and at a rate of one home at a time. After receiving loans from the FHA program, he was able to build the sprawling apartment buildings that we see today. In the late 1940s, Fred Trump purchased the land to build his infamous Beach Haven apartments for $200,000 and immediately put the land in a trust for his children after the purchase. He then would go on to obtain a $16 million subsidy loan from the FHA to build his New Haven apartments. After construction of these apartments was done, Fred's company would come away with $4 million in profits from this loan. And as if that wasn't bad enough already, remember also that Fred left the land these buildings were constructed on to his children in his will. This trust now became worth $1.3 million due to the construction of the apartment. Essentially, Fred Trump turned a $200,000 land investment into a $4 million cash profit for his business, as well as a ground lease valued at $1.3 million, which would provide his children with $60,000 annually. In other words, Roosevelt's FHA loans were the sole reason the Trumps were able to acquire immense generational wealth. It would not have been possible for Fred Trump to build his wealth without the FHA's government subsidies. The Trumps have government subsidies to thank for their immense fortune. The hypocrisy. It was around this time Fred decided to invest in a mega yacht, which he named, very on brand might I add, the Trump Showboat. It blasted the Star-Spangled Banner and released swordfish-shaped balloons. The balloons could then be used to redeem $250 off of a Fred Trump real estate property. By the end of the 1950s, Fred had sold over 1,300 homes in New York and New York exclusively. Fred would be very, very proud of every landlord who paints over the dirt on the walls, as his specialty was cutting costs and saving money on projects, oftentimes jeopardizing the integrity and quality of his projects in the process. Fred would water down paint, scavenge job sites for leftover screws and nails to reuse, mixed his own disinfectant sprays and bug sprays instead of buying them pre-mixed. He would even make his children come to work with him and instruct them to collect those construction materials that he would reuse. Speaking of Trump's children, Fred had 5 children with Mary Ann. Fred Jr., Elizabeth, Donald, and Robert. As one could probably put together at this point, Fred was an intense father, to say the least. Fred Trump ruled his household through fear and authority. Cursing was strictly forbidden. Curfews were to be followed every single day, strictly. He did not allow lipstick. He forbid his kids from eating in between meals. And perhaps one of the weirdest things I've heard of, Fred would have his wife Mary keep report cards on the kids daily. And if the report cards came back poor, Fred would punish his children through disciplinary action. Fred made the 3 Trump boys run paper routes, and when the weather wasn't perfect for them, Fred would allow them to take their family limousine and chauffeur to deliver the papers. It's also worth noting at this point that the Trumps are living in a 23-bedroom mansion in Jamaica Estates. Not so humble or modest beginnings for the Trump children. Fred's firstborn son, Fred Jr., was less than interested in the lifestyle of his father. Fred Sr. did not take this well, and so oftentimes he took it out on Fred Jr. Growing up, Sr. would beat Jr., abuse him verbally, and was particularly hard on him when it came to the finance and business world, wanting him to become, quote, invulnerable. Fred Jr., however, would go on to fulfill his dreams of becoming an airline pilot, of which his dad would call him a glorified bus driver. Fred Trump had a strict no black or colored policy in his apartments. He was arrested at a KKK rally as a teenager. He profited off of subsidies meant for Great Depression victims and pushed one of his children to death through his abuse. A superb quote comes from Fred's granddaughter Mary, a clinical psychologist who studied at Columbia University, in her tell-all book she wrote in 2020. Fred was a high-functioning sociopath. Financial worth was the same as self-worth. Monetary value was human value. The more Fred had, the better he was. If he gave something to someone else, that person would be more and he less. He would pass the attitude to Donald in spades. Fred Trump checks off all the boxes for a cynical racist. You see, people had hard times finding vacancy in Fred Trump's apartment buildings in the 1960s and 1970s. Well, to be fair, it really was only a problem if you weren't white. Despite this obvious racial discrimination, Fred continued to destroy minorities living in New York through his real estate ventures and his, we'll call them odd, business practices. And by odd, I mean unethical. And by unethical, I mean illegal. In 1966, Fred was investigated by the city of New York for receiving an unusually high income without any explanation, audit, or form of proof, which is such a common practice among piece of shit billionaires that it actually has a name, and it's called windfall profiteering. The reason for this was more than likely dishonesty on the part of Fred Trump. Fred was allegedly, but come on, once you hear it, it sounds so Trump. So, allegedly, Fred was purposefully overestimating the cost of his construction projects so that he would receive more funding from government grants and subsidies. So yeah, now that we've discovered just how amazing of a man Fred Trump was, truly a man with copious amounts of honesty and integrity, Donald Trump is an absolute byproduct of Fred's insanity. Whether it be by nature or by nurture or by both, Donald would carry on the Trump legacy in almost every aspect possible. Except for the making money part. Yeah, he kind of just carried over the racism, narcissism, and sociopathic tendencies. One of the most famous lines ever uttered by Donald Trump.
I fought through it. I have been, and I talk about it. It's not been easy for me. It has not been easy for me. And, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. I came into Manhattan, and I had to pay him back, and I had to pay him back with interest. But I came into Manhattan, I started.
Shocker, Donald was a bit dishonest in this quote. Although he is out of touch with reality, so he probably believes the lies he tells himself are true. Donald Trump did not receive a $1 million loan from his dad. Try $413 million in inheritance. Not a loan, inheritance. Most of this $413 million came from Fred posthumously through the transfer of a sham company that was set up by Fred for the sole purpose of evading gift and inheritance taxes. All county building supply and maintenance, it would be named, and money, it would hemorrhage. Fred lied on the company's invoices, which helped him greatly in dodging this inheritance tax. After Fred and his wife had died, they had transferred an estimated $1 billion of estate to their children. When money is transferred, though, however, even to next of kin, there is an inheritance and gift tax. So the estimated amount of taxes that the Trumps would have to pay was estimated around $550 million. That's 55% of the entire transfer of estate. The Trump family would only pay $52 million in taxes during this transfer. That's only 5% of the total estate compared to the estimated 55% that would have been paid in taxes if it were not for this sham company set up by Fred before he died. So how would this even be possible? Well, it's a mixture of things. A mixture of undervaluing Trump properties as well as their company shares, and just a teeny bit of tax fraud would allow the Trumps to significantly undervalue their estate, therefore costing them less in taxes. But how about Trump's incredible dedication to his work? He was already making $200,000 a year and a millionaire before the age of 18. I mean, Donald just put in the work more than anybody else. Well, when I say before the age of 18, I mean by the age of 3 he was making $200,000 a year. That's right. Fred had put Donald on the company's payroll at age 3, essentially making Donald a millionaire by age 8. At age 17, Donald was gifted part ownership in a 52-unit apartment building belonging to his father, and at the end of his college career, Trump had received more than $1 million in cash from his dad. Gifted, remember, not loaned. By the time Trump was in his 40s and 50s, his dad had bumped his salary to more than $5 million a year. So, still think Trump is self-made? To be fair, I think we all knew he wasn't, though. Even QAnon shaman himself wouldn't believe Trump was self-made.